My modest claim is that advertising is the most powerful and sustained system of propaganda in human history, and its cumulative cultural and political effects, unless very quickly checked, will be responsible for destroying the world as we know it. In the process of achieving this, the masters of the advertising system, global corporations bent on nothing but private profits, will be responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands, actually forget that, will be responsible for the deaths of millions of people, mostly non-Western. In addition, the peoples of the world will be prevented from achieving true happiness. Simply stated, our survival as a species is dependent upon minimizing the threat from advertising and the commercial culture that has spawned it. As I said, it's a modest claim that I'm going to make. I'm stating my claims boldly at the outset, so there can be no doubt as to what is at stake in our debates about the media and culture at the start of the new millennium. Now, what's the basis of my outrageous claims? Initially, I would just point to the incredible presence of the advertising and commercial messages in our culture. I mean, just their presence. Ads are everywhere and colonizing more and more spaces almost by the minute. And I use the term colonizing because I think that they're taking over. Space that wasn't about commercial discourse and about commercial speech is becoming commercial speech. And it is reaching into every nook and cranny of the culture. It is an imperializing discourse. And ads individual ads may appear banal, they may appear stupid, but those individual ads carry, I want to argue, they carry a very powerful single message, a unifying message. And I won't tell you what that is right now, we'll get to it. But I think every single ad that you see, in fact, is the carrier of a much, much broader ideology. And that ideology is what is the threat. So let's look at for instance, our entire media system, television and print, has been developed as a delivery system for marketers. The prime function of media, of corporate media, of advertising-supported media, is not to deliver news to us, is not to deliver programming to us. The prime function of media is to deliver us to audiences, us to advertisers. That's where they get their money from. Television gets 100% of its money from advertisers. And what they get in return is they get our eyeballs. And so all the programming, the editorial content, it's all designed to essentially get us to look at something. And then that time and that attention can be sold. In television, where's the money come? Remember the old adage from Deep Throat and All the President's Men, follow the money? You should always follow the money. The money will tell you a great deal. In television, where does the money come from? 100% from advertisers. So I'm not even talking about the ads in between the programs. I'm talking about the programs themselves. That's why they look like they do. They are designed, in fact, to make sure that the ads work in the most effective way. Newspapers, it's about 80% comes from advertisers, 20% comes from subscribers. Magazines is anywhere from 50% to 80%. And more, the internet is moving towards total advertising control as well. That's what I mean by colonization. Look at the movie system. At one time, it was outside the direct influence of the broader marketing system. It is now fully integrated into it, with marketing tie-ins and especially with product placements. Spaces that were once free of commercial control are now, in fact, part of that commercial system. In fact, going to the movies for advertisers, it's the perfect medium. You can't get up when you're in a movie theater. You can't get up and go to the bathroom. You can't go up and turn it off. You are a captive audience, which is what they want. Actually, one of the last captive audiences is in places like this, institutions like this, is in colleges and universities. And I'm pretty sure that we're not too far away from. I'm waiting to get the call from someone saying, "Would you mind wearing this T-shirt, and we'll pay you a certain amount." As public funds are drained from the non-commercial cultural sector, art galleries, museums, and symphonies bid for corporate sponsorship. If you look at sports, Sports are now integrally tied up with sponsorship, whether it's through the namings of stadiums. I mean, some of our most, some of the most, famous names in sports in terms of stadiums are now, they're changing. That you're no longer, it's no longer the Boston Garden, it's the Fleet Center or whatever it is now. Like, it also changes every time some company goes under. Look at baseball. If you want to see colonization of what I'm talking about, look at baseball. Okay, 10 years ago, no ads behind home plate. From the advertiser point of view, that is absolutely wasted. People are looking at the screen, and you're not selling their time. That's why you have ads behind home plate. So the baseball games have now become fully integrated into this. Even those institutions once thought to be outside of the market are being sucked in. High schools now sell the sides of their buses, the spaces of their hallways, and the classroom time of their students to hawkers of candy bars, soft drinks, and jeans. In many cities, sponsors are being sought for public playgrounds, actually for any space. As public funds dry up, the corporate sponsors are there ready to provide the funding. In the contemporary world, everything is sponsored by someone. The latest plans of a company called Space Marketing Incorporated, and it's a company that exists. This is not some wild, fantasy or conspiracy. Space Marketing Incorporated call for rockets to deliver mile-wide Mylar billboards on which can be placed whatever logo you want. So as you go out, it's such a waste. All that beautiful blue sky could be used to sell. And more, and actually, it's in the planning stages right now. Already, Pizza Hut is a logo on the side of the space shuttle. It's a Russian space shuttle, but the Americans, we haven't quite got to the American, but it's coming. It's inevitable. It's an inevitable process. Pepsi is trying to develop plans to figure out a way to be able to put their logo onto the moon itself, onto the surface of the moon, using laser technology to put their logo onto the moon itself. Actually, one of my favorite examples is in boxing. Mike Tyson, the convicted rapist who was fighting in Scotland. This was about 10 years ago. Actually, England wouldn't let him in because they got a rule you can't have convicted rapists come into the country. So he was fighting in Scotland. It was part of his comeback, Mike Tyson, the boxer, part of his comeback, and he was fighting some no-hoper. His only aim was to get knocked out. So the manager of Mike Tyson's opponent saw this as a marketing opportunity. So he went to someone and said, you can place an ad on my boxer. Where would you put it? Where would you put them? He's going to get knocked out. The bottom of the feet. If you're not going to be on your feet for very long, that's a good place for it to be. Okay, there is no place that is outside of the realm of commercial marketing. Public bathrooms. Okay, talk about a captive audience. That's exactly what advertisers want. And there are agencies, advertising agencies, who specialize in getting ads out to public bathrooms. A few years ago, the Bamboo Lingerie Company launched a campaign. Actually, it was spray paint on the ground in Manhattan. It said, from here, this is what the spray paint said. It said, from here, it looks like you could use some new underwear. Okay, it should not be surprising. And again, I could carry this on for hours. Actually, the outrageous nature of where ads are placed. But it should not be surprising that many commentators now identify the realm of culture as simply an adjunct to the system of production and consumption. Now the question is, why should this be so? The answer, of course, lies not in advertising. Advertising is merely a tool of something else. The answer lies not in advertising, but in the realm of capitalist production, which revolutionized how human beings interacted with the physical world around them. Capitalism is a revolutionary society in the sense that no society has ever been able to produce as much as capitalism is able to produce. It changed, the amount of stuff The amount of that was the great revolution of capitalism, and it's a revolution in terms of relations of production, etc. But it's one of its great revolutions was just this productivity. It was just this productivity. It was just this endless productivity. In fact, that fact, the amount of stuff that capitalism produces, that fact now colors the way in which the society presents itself, the way it appears. Objects are everywhere in capitalism. In that sense, as I said, capitalism is truly a revolutionary society, dramatically altering the very landscape of social life in a way no other form of social organization have been able to achieve in such a short period of time. In fact, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, when they wrote the Communist Manifesto, when you read Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, it's tough to know if they're the worst critics of advertising, of capitalism, or its greatest fans, because they love capitalism's dynamism. They saw the development of capitalism, in fact, as essential to getting rid of the vestiges of feudalism before we had what would really come, which was democratic socialism afterwards. Okay, but they loved capitalism dynamism. In fact, they coined the famous phrase, all that is solid melts into air. Capitalism never stands still. Capitalism has to grow, has to keep growing. All that is solid melts into air to highlight this unique dynamism. In fact, the opening lines of Capital, Volume 1 by Marx, pinpointed the essential feature of the capitalist revolution. Okay, Marx spent, literally decades, studying capitalism, and then he spent a long time trying to figure out how he was going to describe it. And he spent a long time trying to figure out what the starting point would be of his analysis of capitalism. Again, and more people are now starting to realize this, capitalists included. If you want to understand capitalism, Marx is the starting point. Okay? If you want to understand communism, it's not. Marx had nothing to say about communism. He had nothing to say about the horrible societies that would be constructed in his name. But if you want to, and so what Marx's great contribution is as an analyst of capitalism and of understanding the logic that drives capitalism. And in fact, the opening lines of Capital, Volume 1, are the following. He says, the wealth of societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails appears as, quote, an immense collection of commodities. An immense collection of commodities. And he puts that in quotes because he's quoting himself from something he wrote before. But he's saying, look, that's the revolutionary aspect of capitalism. It's the amount of stuff, the immense collection of commodities that it is able to produce. So in seeking initially to distinguish his object of analysis from what preceded it, Marx referred to this quantitative dimension. Now, production in one sense has been solved, that the problem of production has been solved. It is not, but unfortunately that's not enough. It is not enough only to produce the immense collection of commodities. They must also be sold so that further investment in production is feasible. Once produced, commodities must go through the circuit of distribution, exchange, and consumption so that profit can be returned to the owners of capital and value in a money form. Again, what capitalists do is they take capital, they take money, they invest it in labor, they invest it in materials, they produce something, and then unless you can sell it at the end, unless you can convert it back into money, that whole process is useless. So consumption is an absolutely key aspect of this. In fact, if it is not completed, the system would collapse into stagnation and depression. Capitalism, therefore, has to ensure the sale of commodities on pain of death. On pain of death. In that sense, the problem of capitalism is not mass production. That's been solved. The problem of capitalism, instead, is the problem of consumption. So central is consumption to its survival and growth that at the end of the 19th century, industrial capitalism invented a unique new institution. That institution was the advertising industry, to ensure that the immense accumulation of commodities, the immense collection of commodities, are converted back into a money form. The function of this new industry, of the advertising industry, will be to recruit the best creative talent of the society. If you want to know where the best creative talent is, don't go to Hollywood, don't go to novels, that's not where it is. The best creative talent is on Madison Avenue, because they're involved in something really difficult. How do you communicate in an environment where people don't want to be communicated to and where everyone is trying to get your attention? That requires creativity. That requires actually the cutting edge creativity. So the function of this new industry will be to recruit the best creative talent of society and to create a culture in which desire and identity would be fused with commodities. So commodities would not be some peripheral thing. Commodities would be how people thought about their own identities. Because you have to sell this stuff. You can only sell this stuff if identity can be connected to the world of commodities. To make the dead world of things, come alive with human possibilities. Actually, Marx, again in chapter 1 of Capital, Marx called this, he called this the fetishism of commodities. You've got to take what's dead and you've got to make it come alive. You've got to make it human. You've got to make it part of human identity. You've got to make objects as important to people as other people are. That's what he meant by, partly what he meant by the fetishism of commodities. And indeed, there has never been a propaganda effort to match the effort of advertising in the 20th century and now into the 21st century. More thought, more effort, more creativity, more time, more attention to detail has gone into the selling of the immense collection of commodities than any other campaign in human history to change public consciousness. Religion, possibly, over the centuries. Religion possibly is might be some competition with advertising. But in terms of the amount of resources that have gone into it, I don't think there is anything that has come close to it. Okay, one indication is simply the amount of money that's spent on it, exponentially that has been spent on advertising. In the United States today, over $200 billion a year is spent on selling us things. And that's just on the advertising industry. That doesn't count what goes into the media, it doesn't count public relations, it doesn't count all the other promotional stuff, just directly what advertising is responsible for. Globally, that is over $400 billion a year. This concentration of effort, I believe, is unprecedented. And the ad messages that are produced, they're not like any other messages. More care and resources are poured into the creation of commercial messages. Okay, there's much more care that goes, if you watch television, compare the ads to the programs. There's about 10 times more effort that goes into the ads than the programming. That's why the programs are so good and the programs are so bad and the ads are so good. On a per second basis, there's about 10 times as much money more money goes into advertising than goes into the programming. Ads are made like big budget Hollywood films. I'm not talking about an ad here or there. I'm talking about the average ad is made with the same amount of effort, the same amount of care to detail, the same amount of creativity as we spend on the big, as on Jurassic Park or King Kong or Star Wars or whatever. And there's a lot of fuss made about these movies that come out. Well, there's an equivalent of that movie in terms of its concentration of creativity and effort that is everywhere in the culture. And we think it's not important. We think it's just ads. I'm not affected by ads. Actually, if we weren't affected by ads, we would be unique in human history in that we weren't affected by our culture. Everyone is affected by ads. Everyone. I mean, it's like it's like the air that we breathe. How can you not be affected by the air that you breathe? This discourse has seeped into our consciousness and our imaginations in ways that we may not even be aware of. Now, I'm going to give you, actually, if I had my computer with me, there's a visual stuff that goes with this, but you'll have to imagine this. I'm going to give you 3 words, and there's a missing word, fill it in. A, something, is forever. Right. Okay, a diamond is forever, everyone knows that. Okay, that idea, in fact, has conditioned our courtship rituals. Where did that idea come from? Deep in history somewhere as part of tradition? No. That idea was invented in 1948. The NWA's advertising agency on Madison Avenue. Some copywriter came up with the slogan, "A diamond is forever." Okay, the major thing people need to know about diamonds, and it's the great secret of the diamond industry, diamonds are not scarce. You can literally diamonds. If the reason you buy diamonds is not because they're scarce. The reason you buy gold and there's some. The reason you buy diamonds is because there's been literally a giant propaganda effort to convince you that somehow diamonds are connected with love. And that was because diamond sales were flagging in between the two wars, and De Beers, who controls the flow of diamonds globally, and who can literally dig diamonds up out of the ground by the ton, said there's got to be some other basis on which diamonds have meaning, and so they became this symbolic dimension. The aim of the diamond industry is not to dig up diamonds out of the ground. The aim of the diamond industry is to restrict the flow of diamonds. Restrict the flow of diamonds. De Beers they've got. Again, I know people you kind of start exaggerating this, but they have literally billions of dollars worth of diamonds stockpiled. Their aim is not to get as many diamonds out as possible, right? That's if it was scarce, as you would do, you dig as much as you can because every one you dig out is worth a lot. And therefore, you can sell them. No, that's not diamonds. Diamonds are, you can dig them out by the ton. So if you want to make them valuable, you've got to restrict the flow of diamonds. It's actually, I think, the most successful advertising campaign in history. And actually part of the biggest scam as well. A diamond is forever. They don't want you to sell your diamonds. They want, once you got your diamond, they want you to hang on to it forever. Because they have more diamonds to sell. As I said, one of the biggest, well, you won't call it a scam, but it's the most successful propaganda effort in history. From a diamond is forever to a world where more kids can recognize Joe Camel and Ronald McDonald than Mickey Mouse and Santa Claus, where the golden arches are more recognizable than the Christian cross. This commercial discourse is the ground on which we live. This commercial discourse is the space in which we learn to think, the lens through which we come to understand the world that surrounds us. Now, if you want to understand the modern world, if you want to understand where we're headed, where we are right now, and you don't put an analysis of advertising and this commercial culture at its center, you're designed to be in ignorance of what drives us. In fact, most of the time, we never pay attention to this commercial environment. In one sense, it kind of disappears from view, right? It disappears from view because it's everywhere. When it's everywhere, you don't pay attention to it. As Marshall McLuhan, once said about trying to figure out the influence of media, we're not too sure who discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't the fish. That is, when it's your environment, it just is. It's the air that you breathe, and therefore you don't pay any attention to it. And the question is, how do you get the fish to pay attention to the water? And how do you get us now to pay attention to this cultural environment? Seeking this understanding, as I said, any theory of modern capitalism, any theory of social change, any attempt at social change that does not take account of the analysis of this commercial culture is doomed to be impotent and marginal, which is where progressive change is actually in most of especially in the Western world. Seeking this understanding will involve clarifying what we mean by the power and effectiveness of ads, and of being able to pose the right question. And for too long, if you want to understand something, you've got to ask the right question. If you ask the wrong question, you can spend a lifetime studying it, and it won't tell you anything. For too long, the debate has raged around, or the debate about advertising has been about whether a particular campaign, whether it's for Pepsi or Ford or Anheuser-Busch or whatever, whether that campaign makes you buy more of that product. Okay, that's why when we talk about is advertising effective, that's the question we ask. Now, that's an important question if you're Pepsi-Cola or Anheuser-Busch or Ford. Right? It's not particularly, but if you're interested in the cultural impact and the social power of advertising, the impact of advertising on society as a whole, that is the wrong question to ask. The right question would ask about the cultural role of advertising, not its narrow marketing role. Culture is the place and space where a society tells stories about itself, where values are articulated and expressed, where notions of good and evil, of morality and immorality are defined. Okay, and every society has a cultural space. Every society has a space where those stories are told. And in our culture, it's the stories of advertising that dominate the spaces that mediate this function. Now, I think human beings are essentially a storytelling species. And if you want to understand the storytelling, if you want to understand the storytelling process in this culture, then you've got to look at the main storytellers. Who tells the stories most of the time? And the storytellers in this culture are those people that have the money. Again, listen to Deep Throat's advice, follow the money. And what we find in advertising, what we find in commercial culture, in fact, is a very consistent set of stories. A very consistent set of stories that are told about how we should live. And so I think the question that we should ask about advertising is not, does it help us, does it help sell goods? It may do, may not do. Are some campaigns good, some campaigns bad? Yeah, of course, but that's what business schools ask. That's their question. It's not our question. And for too long, we've taken, this is what happens when you ask the wrong question. You're on someone else's terrain. Okay, the right question is actually not the question of the sales effect. The right question is, what are the values of advertising? What is the morality of advertising? What values does advertising push? What stories does it tell us? Well, the most basic set of stories, so I want to go through the stories. Right? And I think you can tell them relatively quickly. The most basic set of stories that it tells us are around happiness. And every society has to have a story about happiness, about how individuals can become happy, feel good subjectively and objectively. And the cultural system of advertising, in fact, gives us a very specific answer to that question for our society. How do you become happy? The way to happiness is through the consumption of objects. Things will make us happy. Commodities will make us happy. And in one very important sense, that is the consistent and explicit message of every single message within the system of market communication. It is better to buy than not to buy. It is better to buy than not. That the marketplace is where you will find satisfaction. The marketplace is where you will find identity. The marketplace is what will make you happy. It's a great, it's a very powerful story to tell. Happiness is a very, people striving for happiness is a fundamental need that people have. And you can provide this answer. The way to happiness is through what, just coincidentally, capitalism actually produces, which is stuff, things. In fact, again, if you looked at ads, just start looking at ads from that perspective. From that perspective, in terms of what they're saying about human happiness. In fact, we're encouraged to have a deep and intimate relationship with things. If Marx was here and he looked at modern advertising, he would say that's the fetishism of commodities. They're asking us to have relationships with products as though they're real people, and deep and intimate relationships with people. So economic growth is justified not simply on the basis that it will provide employment, right? Why do we need to make the economy grow, keep growing and growing and growing? Well, one argument could be that it will provide employment. But lots of things can provide employment. It doesn't just have to be the production of things that provides employment. The much deeper philosophical justification for economic growth is that more stuff will make us more happy. The more things we have as a society, the happier that we will be. This rationale for the existing system of increasing production is told by advertising in the most compelling form possible. Again, economic growth equals good. Why? Why is economic growth always equal good? Why is our happiness tied to gross domestic product? Why is it not tied to other things as well that we know are connected to human happiness? Again, GDP is if you take GDP as a measure of happiness, it's a very specific way in which happiness is measured. But in fact, it's this story. And this story is what advertising, when I say it is seeped into every nook and cranny of the culture, that is the story that goes with it. Buy, buy, buy. Why? Because it's going to make you happy. Why? Because that's how you can express who you are. Buy, buy, buy. That your inner self will be expressed in the outer world through the objects that we consume. And that story, that human happiness is intimately connected to the provisions of the market, to economic growth, I think is the major motivating force for social change on a global scale. It is what is driving economic growth around the world in so-called developing countries. That somehow the marketplace will will bring us happiness. The question that we need to pose at this stage, and it's almost never posed, because it's a heretical question, because if the answer is not what you want it to be, then actually everything else falls apart. And the question, of course, is this true? Does happiness come from material things? Do we get happier as a society as we get richer, as our standard of living increases, as we have more access to the immense collection of objects? Now, obviously, these are complex issues. But if I had to answer quickly, the general answer to that question would be, is this true? Do things lead to greater happiness? Do more things lead to greater happiness? The answer to that question is no. And I think if I was to ask you that, do you think we as a society are happier now than we were 30 years ago or 50 years ago? Actually, most people have a sense that that we're not any happier now, even though our standard of living has increased in absolute terms in pretty spectacular ways. But the level of happiness has not increased. In fact, lots of people have measured this. There are people who study happiness and satisfaction. It's a great literature. In a series of surveys that have been conducted in the United States starting in 1945, they're called the happiness surveys. Researchers sought to examine the link between material wealth and subjective happiness. And they've concluded that when examined cross-culturally as well as historically, there is a very weak correlation between economic growth and happiness. In fact, I took part in these surveys. You must already have as well. People call you up and they ask you this question. This is the question they ask. They say, okay, imagine for yourself the best world that you think you could have, the best life you think you could have. You can give that a 10. Imagine for yourself the worst life that you think you could have, and give that a 1. So you've constructed your own scale in your head. Okay? That's what 1 is, that's what 10 is. And they say, okay, now where would you say you are on that scale? And so you put yourself on that, depending 4, 5, 6, or whatever. And if you do that, actually, if we did that for this room, we could come up with a happiness index for this room. If everyone did that, we could say, and then we could compare it to another room somewhere else. Well, if you do it cross-culturally, and this is what the researchers do. They do it cross-culturally. They do it, between societies. There is no correlation between richer societies being any happier than poorer societies. And part of the reason for that is that there's also no correlation between, the question that I kind of posed before. There's no correlation between economic growth historically in one society. So that we're not any happier than we were 30 years ago, even though we're much richer, even though our standard of living is much higher. And the reason for that actually is pretty simple, is that it's actually kind of intuitive as well. Once you get past the nonsense the economic textbooks try and spin you about where happiness comes from, is that in fact what most people do is when we think about levels of satisfaction and happiness in terms of where we are, we don't compare ourselves. We don't say, "Wow, look how much wealthier I am than someone in Africa." That's not the comparison we make. We also don't say, "Well, look how much richer we are. Look how much our standard of living has increased from our parents' generation." Don't look historically either. What we do is we look at one time in this society and we compare ourselves to other people. And if the standard of living has gone up for everyone, then the average has gone up for everyone. And the same number of people are below the average as are above the average. And therefore, we're a social species. We compare. We're not just individuals who make decisions based on separate from society. We are social beings. And so we look around and we compare ourselves to what other people have at that time. Now, again, I don't think these conclusions are that surprising. Once you start to kind of go into them, this is what the scholars have found. There's another set of studies as well called the quality of life surveys, where people are asked, what is it that you want out of life? What are important to you? And again, what people answer with is they don't normally answer with material values. They don't say, "I want a BMW, I want a big car, or a big house, etc." Or if they do say that, they say, "Well, what's that going to give you?" In fact, when people are asked what it is that makes them happy, what they're looking for human connection. They're looking for sociability. They're looking for friendships. They're looking for intimacy. They're looking for sexuality. They're looking for autonomy. They're looking for relaxation. That's actually what, when you ask people what it is that makes them happy, that's what they respond with. The problem, you can see the problem, right? That's not what the society produces. What we produce is stuff. Stuff is not connected to what really makes us happy. It makes us comfortable. We can't live without our stuff. Don't get me wrong. It's not that we don't need our stuff. We need our stuff. And once we have a little bit of it, we get used to it. Once we have a little bit of it, we can't do without it. It's the thing, there's no going back. Once you've reached a certain level, then you get used to that. It gives you comfort, but it no longer gives you satisfaction. It no longer gives you happiness. It no longer gives you what it is that people strive for. Okay, these conclusions point to one of the great ironies of the market system. Okay, the market is good at providing those things that can be bought and sold. And it has pushed us via advertising. That's what every ad tells us. Go to the marketplace. Go to the marketplace. Products will make you happy. So the market system pushes us towards a place that is outside. It pushes us to a place that cannot provide happiness. Because the real sources of happiness, social relationships, are outside the capability of the market to provide. The marketplace cannot provide love. The marketplace cannot provide real friendships. The marketplace cannot provide sociability. It can provide other material things and services which we can't do without, but they are not what makes us happy. The ad industry, by the way, has known this since at least the 1920s. And in fact, around the 1920s, they stopped talking about objects. If stuff was what really made us happy, they talk about objects, how good they were. Well, that's what they did in the first stage of advertising, from about the 1880s to about somewhere in the 1920s. If you look at advertising at that point, it is all about the products. It's all about what products did, how well they were made, etc. But starting about around the 1920s, that changes. Around the 1920s, what advertisers started to do, and realizing what it is that drove people, they started to take the images of what we say we want and started to connect those to the things they have to sell. So they take the images of the good life. They take the images of the good life. They take the images of friendship. They take the images of sociability. They take the images of autonomy. They take the images which they cannot provide, and they link them symbolically and say, well, actually, you only have to believe it for a split second, but this commodity is connected to what really makes you happy. It is a pathway to what really makes you happy. So he starts to connect commodities, the things they have to sell, with the powerful images of a deeply desired social life that people say they want. Look at advertising from that perspective. In one sense, forget that it's about products. So what are the images that are being used? What are the values that are being sold? And if you look at that, in fact, it is what you would see there will be images of family, images of friendship, images of sociability, images of excitement, images of adventure, right? That's where you see those, and those stories are then linked. Those values are then linked to the material world of things. That's why advertising is so attractive. Okay, the beers example I gave before, why did it work? People want love. And the beers gave us a way that we could have love. It gave us a way in which love could be expressed. It also happened, for De Beers, they were also monopoly, and therefore there were no other competing stories about what diamonds could mean, and therefore they were free to give diamonds whatever meaning they wanted to give. But that's why advertising is so attractive, so powerful, so seductive. What it offers us are images of the real sources of human happiness: family life, romance and love, sexuality and pleasure, friendship and sociability, leisure and relaxation, independence and control. That's why it's so powerful. That is what is real about advertising. That is what is real about advertising. The cruel illusion of advertising, however, is the way that it links those qualities to a place that by definition cannot provide it: the marketplace and the immense collection of commodities. The falsity of advertising then is not in the appeals it makes. The appeals are very real. It's not in the appeals it makes, but in the answers it provides. We want love and friendship and sexuality, and advertising points the way to it. As one ad executive said, this is Jerry Goodis, again, if I had to come up with one line trying to describe advertising, this will be it. He says, advertising doesn't mirror how people are acting, but how they are dreaming. Advertising is, in that sense, kind of a dream factory. It taps into our real emotions and repackages them back to us connected to the world of things. It's kind of like the dream life of the culture, the dream life of the culture. Taking what it is that that is driving people and connects that, as I said, to this world of things. Now, in that sense, advertising's role in this is actually profound. And actually, the metaphor I want to use for how advertising works, we'll come back to it later on as well. The metaphor I want to use actually is the metaphor of the drug pusher on the street corner. Because we know things aren't really connected to happiness. We know that, right? But just as we try and break our addiction to things, it's there on the corner. Go on, one more hit. Go on, one more, and just one more time. It's there on every street corner, and it stops us, in fact, thinking about different ways in which we could possibly think about happiness. Okay, what effect does this have? The first effect that it has, one of the things that it does is it means that we go into enormous debt to try and get the things that we think make us happy. Juliet Shaw, the economist, wrote a really fantastic book called The Overspent American. And that is us. We overspend. We overspend individually, but we overspend systematically as well. She says one reason for this is, the reason that we do this is, again, we are social creatures. And the way that advertising and media is now fit into this is, he said, in the 40s and 50s, the so-called, we compared ourselves to the Joneses, keeping up with the Joneses. Well, the Joneses were actually, the life of the Joneses was attainable because they were our next door neighbors. Or perhaps they lived in the street over. They were one street over. And so the models of emulation that we had were more realistic. I don't want to say they were realistic, but they were closer to us. We compared ourselves to the next rung of the socioeconomic ladder. Well, what the spread of advertising and the spread of media based on advertising has done, it has dramatically changed that. Because now what normality is not what we have and what our neighbors have. Now what normality is what the top 10% of the population has. Now normality is the lives of the rich and famous. Now normality is cribs. Now normality is Pimp My Ride. Now normality is the Home Garden channel. And we think that is what normal is. And that's who we compare ourselves to. So our reference groups have stretched. And when everyone is comparing themselves, everyone now, only 15% of the population say they would be comfortable, they would be satisfied with a comfortable life. When the other 85% are now striving towards the top, that is a recipe for disaster. How do you reach that lifestyle? Well, especially when you don't have the money, well, there's two ways. One, you go into enormous debt, which is what Americans have done. Especially when wages have not been increasing as well. You go into enormous debt. And secondly, you work harder. That is a disastrous situation, and the economic crisis that we're in right now is an indication of that. Remember, where was it first indicated? It was in the so-called subprime market, right? It indicated as debt. So the first effect, as I said, is debt, and the kind of way of thinking that comes along with that. Okay, the rise in household debt. The largest increases, in fact, in debt are not among the poor, but are those earning between $50,000 and $100,000. Actually, the middle class are really in debt. The middle class are really, really in debt. They're the ones who have the most amount of credit card debt. Credit card debt is like, capitalism is brilliant to some degree, right? What they did was, starting in the 1970s, where American wages when there were strong unions actually was pegged very closely to the level of productivity, and wages actually went up and up and up and up. And what happened in the 1970s was, as productivity kept rising, wages leveled out. However, you now had an American working class that was addicted to a lifestyle that it could no longer afford. So what did capitalism do? Capitalism, it said, okay, instead of paying you wages, we'll lend you money instead at exorbitant rates. And people went into huge amounts of debt, first on their houses and then onto credit cards. And again, the credit card industry, the most important thing you need to know about the credit card industry is they rely upon people having huge amounts of debt. They don't want you to pay your cards off. Okay, they don't want you to pay your monthly balances off. In fact, if you pay it off, if you pay your monthly balances off and don't pay them any interest, do you know what they call you? Deadbeat. Yeah. You're a deadbeat. Why? Because you're paying off your loans? Yeah. Well, from their purposes, you're a deadbeat because you're not doing what they want to do, which is to pay interest. And they want you to pay interest forever. Secondly, as I said, the hours of work have risen, so that over the last 25 years, we work 10% more than we did. The third thing that's happened is the national savings rate has plummeted. Okay, everyone else in the world saves more than we do. That's why we're in debt to the Chinese. 60% of American families, 60% of American families only have enough savings to last them 1 month if they were to lose their jobs. 60% of Americans are 1 month away from disaster. Think of the anxiety that causes. Think of what employers can get people to do when there is when they're held with that much insecurity. This has also affected what we call the public purse and collective consumption. Debt, individual debt, consumer debt, has loosened the bonds between individuals and their communities. It's loosened the bonds between individuals and their communities. Why? Okay, especially when it comes to paying taxes, for example. When we have these, the Proposition 2.5 overrides, they're very rarely successful. And again, what's going on in people's heads? Well, why should I be paying more taxes when I've got this huge, credit card bill to pay? Here's the community. Here's me. And so it loosens the bonds between individuals and their communities. And so we're much less willing to pay for public services. Actually, only some I wish people would really be upset as to where federal dollars were going. Because actually, we pay a lot of money, but where does the federal dollars go? Mostly into the military-industrial complex. And we have more than enough money to pay for a system of national health care and education, etc. But we're not encouraged to think about the taxes at that level. We only think about taxes at the local level. We only think about taxes at the state level. The taxes that actually give you something, the taxes that actually provide you with services, are the ones that there is most resistance to. And again, that is very specific. That is very deliberately done. We care less about other people. And part of the reason for that is the commercial culture tells us you are what you buy. That your major identity is an individual identity, is not connected to other things. That's what this commercial culture tells us. That's what these stories that link happiness to things tell us. In fact, Margaret Thatcher, if you wanted to, again, she gave the best articulation to this. Margaret Thatcher once said, and this is the neoliberal mantra and this is how the logic of advertising makes its way into politics. Margaret Thatcher said, and she was not misquoted, this is exactly what she meant. She said, quote, "There is no such thing as society. There are just individuals and their families." Now, actually, she realized if she had just finished the sentence that there are just individuals, people would have said, "You're nuts. I care about something beyond me. I care about my family." So even she, the arch conservative, had to go outside the notion of the individual and that the individual actually cares about something else and their families. But there's no such thing as society. All you should care about is yourself and your family, and then everything else that's not your concern. The market will take care of that. Okay, the market appeals to the worst in us. The market appeals to greed, it appeals to selfishness, and discourages what is the best about us: compassion, caring, and generosity. And collective questions about collective issues. are pushed to the margins of the culture. Okay, I mean, the disillusionment with this again is a very, the disillusionment with government. The government has been turned into the enemy. Now I realize it can be the enemy, but right now it is the only institution that has any kind of democratic sense built into it, and yet it's been turned into the enemy. So most people are encouraged not to vote, and then we're encouraged to elect people like Republicans who don't believe in government. So those collective issues, in fact, have been marginalized. Unfortunately, we are now in a situation, both globally and domestically, where solutions to pressing nuclear and environmental problems will have to take a collective form. The marketplace cannot deal. The marketplace can't do it. The marketplace cannot deal with the problems that face us at the turn of the millennium. The marketplace cannot deal with global warming. The marketplace cannot deal with the running out of resources, cannot deal with peak oil. The marketplace can't deal with nuclear extermination or the threat of nuclear extermination. There are more nuclear weapons now than there ever were. The threat of nuclear extermination has not gone away, and the marketplace cannot deal with it. As the environmentalists say, right, the famous environmentalist slogan, we all live downstream now. But we have to find collective answers to this, and yet the major force at the center of the society tells us exactly the opposite. Relegates discussion of collective issues to the peripheries of the culture, and instead talks in powerful ways of individual desire and fantasy and pleasure and comfort. There's no easy answers to this, because in fact the ground on which we will come up with answers, the ground on which we think, is dominated by advertising. The lens through which we will look at the world is dominated, the culture is dominated by this idea, these stories that says, buy now, buy now, buy now, more debt, more debt. That's what, and to the extent that it encourages us to think about the future, it encourages us to think about tomorrow, possibly the day after, possibly, think 10 years down the road, think next year. Corporations can't think that long. Corporations are driven by what their profits are going to be, and this quarter. So the people who are in charge of our policy are literally blind to the dangers that we will see. They literally can't. They are legally not allowed to be able to look 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. Politicians should do that. Okay, that actually is what politicians should be doing. That is the role that they should have. But the major actors within the marketplace don't do that. The major discourse that surrounds us is about now, immediacy. It's about desire. It's about being happy now, not in 10 years' time. How do we develop these alternative ways? That's actually the great challenge. At the same time, it's how do you get an addict? It's not, we're all addicted, by the way. We're addicts. When George Bush said America is addicted to oil, he was right. About the only time he was right in 8 years, but he was one time telling the truth. America actually is addicted to oil. Right? If that's true, we're addicts. We're addicted. How does an addict find help? An addict is really dangerous, by the way, of course. Because once you're addicted, you will do anything to feed your habit. 1 million dead Iraqis? No problem. War is a permanent state? No problem, right? That is what addicts do. Addicts will do anything. Addicts will do anything. And that is exactly what we're doing. From the perspective of the dealer, okay, once you know you have a population of addicts out there, and they're addicted to something that you have, well, then, if you're controlling something, then violence is what will maintain your control. So from both the perspective of the addict and the dealer itself. How do we get out of this situation? Just on oil, right? If there's any doubt of why America is in occupations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, if Afghanistan, if you think it has anything to do with Osama bin Laden and the Taliban, you've got to be, I don't know, I don't quite, I mean, it is such a patently false argument to make. I mean, Obama is still making it. I mean, he must cringe every time he has to make it. I mean, George Bush didn't know any better. Obama is a smart guy and knows, and yet, because of the position he's in, he's forced to actually say those things. To make these idiotic things, statements about what the Afghan war is about. We'll see what he said. I mean, he says, we have to get people to see clearly soon. I mean, he just said that today. He's going to make a statement around Afghanistan. I'm actually dying to see what that statement is going to be and whether he's going to be. Actually, I'm not hopeful. I know exactly what that statement is going to be. It's not going to be it's not going to be an intellectually honest statement. You don't get elected to be president of the United States as a radical. Sorry to disappoint anyone who voted for him on that basis, but that's right. Obama is a brand. He makes us feel good. He makes a lot of people feel good about it, right? Great to vote. I mean, he's a brand, but brands are simply that. Brands are brands. Brands are ideas. They're not policy institutions. Okay, getting out of this situation will require enormous work. And one response may just be to say, we'll just enjoy the end of the world. One last great fling. One party to end all parties. As Frederick Jameson, the literary theorist, says, it's easier for people to imagine, what does the world allow us to imagine? It is easier for people to imagine the end of the world. We've got this movie 2012 and Independence Day. It's easier for people to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And that is a failure of imagination. That is because our cultural field has given us a limited set of visions to imagine the future. The alternative response, a long time ago, I'll end it, a long time ago, Marx said, there are two possible futures for humankind. Okay, one, and he didn't say one was going to be automatic and the other one, right? Because nothing is automatic. That's human being. There are no guarantees in history. Okay, there are no guarantees in history. History will not work itself out in some abstract way and it'll be okay at the end. Right? That's not going to. What Marx said was he observed that there were two directions that capitalism could take towards what he called communism, but a democratic socialism, or a brutal barbarism. Socialism or barbarism. Those are the choices that Marx gave at the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century. At the start of the 21st century, those choices have never been starker. They've never been starker. Where our future lies will depend upon what we do. It will depend upon the answers that we came up with. It will depend upon the clear-headedness of our analysis. And it'll come up, and it will depend upon whether we are willing, whether we are able, not willing, we're willing and able to envision different worlds, a different future that is as much fun, that is as much about pleasure, that is as sexy, that motivates people as much as the consumer culture does. That's a challenge. It's not, people aren't going to be motivated from duty. We do things as the right. People will be motivated because it's the fun thing to do. And I think the left and progressives, we've not been very good on fun. We've not been very good on pleasure. We've not been, why? And I think we can. It's democratic socialism will really be fun. It'll be really fun. People will be much, much happier. And we have just not been able to articulate how that will take place. So that's the challenge that I want to leave you on. Thank you.